The divorce had been civilized. That was the word people kept using afterward, civilized, as though the real measure of a marriage's end was how quietly it could be dismantled. No screaming in the driveway. No contested furniture. Laura had taken the sectional sofa and the dog, and Daniel Carter had taken the house, the toolbox, and a daughter who spent alternate weeks in each parent's orbit like a small, cheerful moon. He was 38 years old, and he lived alone in a 3-bedroom colonial on Finch Street in Maplewood, Colorado, at an elevation of 7,200 feet, where the air was thin and the winters came early and stayed long. The 3rd bedroom had become a kind of archive of Emma's various enthusiasms. A half-finished papier-mâché volcano from a science fair 2 years prior, a bin of art supplies, a shelf of chapter books with cracked spines. He hadn't changed it. He wouldn't. His work kept him structured. He was a structural engineer for a mid-size firm called Harmon and Associates, a job that suited him in the way that certain personalities are suited to certain professions. He was precise, patient, and comfortable with load-bearing problems. He could look at a building and understand how its weight was distributed, where the tension lived, what kept it standing. It was a useful skill. It did not translate to marriage. 2 years since the papers. He had learned to cook, really cook, not just heat things out of necessity. Emma would eat almost anything he made, which he suspected was partly loyalty and partly genuine appetite. She had told him once, with the solemn authority of a 7-year-old, that pancakes for dinner were the greatest invention in human history. He had written it on a sticky note and put it on the refrigerator. It was still there. The house was clean in the way a careful person's house is clean. Not pristine, but ordered. His tools were hung on the pegboard in the garage, with an outline painted behind each one so he could see what was missing at a glance. His filing system for Emma's school papers was a manila folder labeled by year. He had read 3 parenting books in the first 6 months post-divorce and found them all maddening in their cheerfulness, but had absorbed certain practical pieces nonetheless. He did not go on dates. He had tried once a woman named Sandra who worked in urban planning and was perfectly pleasant and interested in jazz. And afterward, he had driven home feeling like a person who had worn the wrong coat to a party. It wasn't grief, exactly. It was more like recalibration. He was still figuring out the shape of the life he was actually living versus the one he had been building toward, and those two things had not yet aligned. His closest friend, a fellow engineer named Marcus Holt, who had survived his own divorce 4 years prior, called him every Sunday. Marcus had a second wife now and twin daughters and a dog with an embarrassing name, and he spoke about the second chapter of his life with the genuine astonishment of a man who had not expected to have one. Daniel listened and appreciated it and did not feel ready. What he felt, mostly, was the particular weight of a house that was quiet too often. Not every week on Emma's weeks, the house was gloriously loud with her opinions about everything. But on the alternate weeks, when her bedroom was dark and the 3rd drawer in the kitchen had her plastic cups in it and she was not there to use them, the quiet was different. It had a texture. He had stopped cataloging it. That was growth, he supposed. Emma Carter was 7 years old and had recently lost 2 teeth in the same week, which she treated as a significant economic event. She had constructed, with the help of a library book on economics for children and her own considerable imagination, a theory about the tooth fairy that Daniel found both impressive and slightly unnerving. The tooth fairy, according to Emma, did not simply collect teeth. She ran a marketplace. The teeth were raw material for something Emma was still working out exactly what, and the price varied depending on tooth condition, which was why you had to brush properly. A cavity-riddled tooth, Emma explained, fetched less than a clean one. Supply and demand. Where did she learn the phrase supply and demand? Daniel had asked his mother over the phone. Television, probably. Or you. You use it when the grocery store runs out of the good pasta. He had no rebuttal for this. Emma was the kind of child who asked follow-up questions, which meant bedtime stories took considerably longer than advertised. He would read 3 pages of whatever chapter book they were working through, and she would stop him to ask whether the character's decision made sense given what they knew about her earlier, and Daniel would put the book down and they would discuss narrative logic at 9:30 at night while she was supposed to be sleeping. He suspected she was training to become either a novelist or a very difficult law student. The Christmas decorations were her domain. Daniel provided the boxes and the step stool and the tape, and Emma made all aesthetic decisions. This meant the tree, a 4-foot artificial pine they'd had for 3 years, was decorated with a specific and personal logic. Ornaments she had made herself occupied the eye-level branches. Store-bought ones went higher where she couldn't reach, and the star on top was a felt cutout she had assembled in 2nd grade that listed noticeably to the left and was, in Daniel's view, perfect. She had insisted on hanging one ornament on the kitchen doorknob so the house knows it's Christmas everywhere, not just near the tree. He had not argued. The ornament was a small ceramic penguin wearing a Santa hat, and it knocked against the doorframe when you walked through, and he had come to find the sound a kind of seasonal metronome. On Emma's weeks, the house smelled like cinnamon and colored pencils. He read her the same 3 holiday books every year. At her request, she liked knowing what came next, she said. Because real life was unpredictable enough. He had thought about that for a long time after she said it. She called him every night when she was at Laura's. Always at 8:15, which was, he understood, the window after bath and before sleep. Sometimes the calls were brief, a report on her day, a question about something at school, a request that he not forget to water the small cactus on her windowsill. Sometimes they were longer. He lived for those calls in a way that was both sustaining and slightly painful, the way a plant lives for light, necessarily, completely, and with no ability to do otherwise. It was Laura's year for Christmas Eve. That was the agreement, alternating by year, each parent taking the holiday that mattered most in their respective custody calendar. Daniel had Christmas morning. He had designed a small ritual around it. Emma would arrive at 7 a.m., wearing her pajamas, and they would open gifts before breakfast. And then he would make eggs and toast and the specific apple cider he heated on the stovetop because she thought the microwave version tasted like sadness. But Christmas Eve was Laura's, and that left Daniel with the Saturday before, the house to himself, and a rotisserie chicken he had picked up from the grocery store because he had not felt like cooking, and there was no one to pretend for. Marcus had texted at noon to invite him to a gathering at his house. Mulled wine, he'd written. Kids will be chaotic, but in a good way. You should come, Daniel had replied. Next time. Thanks, though. It wasn't that he disliked Marcus's family gatherings. It was that he knew how they would go. He would stand in the kitchen with a glass of wine, and people would ask how he was doing, and he would say, fine, and they would nod, in the particular way people nod when they don't believe you but don't want to push. He would watch Marcus's daughters argue over a toy and feel the specific ache of Emma's absence like a phantom limb. He would drive home by 9:30, feeling both grateful for the company and worse for having tried. Some nights you were better alone. He knew himself well enough to know which kind of night this was. He had started stringing the exterior Christmas lights at 3 in the afternoon when the snow began. It came lightly at first, the kind of snow that seems decorative rather than serious, and then with more intention as the temperature dropped. By the time he finished and went inside, his fingers were stiff and the yard looked like a photograph of itself. He showered, changed into the clothes he wore when he was not performing any particular version of himself. Old jeans, a flannel he had owned for 6 years, wool socks, and settled in to assemble the least complicated evening he could construct. The chicken went into the oven to re-warm. He poured 2 fingers of bourbon. He turned on the television to find a film. Outside, the snow accumulated with the unhurried certainty of something that had all the time in the world. He thought briefly about Emma. She was probably building something with her grandmother's craft supplies right now, directing whoever was nearby to hand her the scissors. She was fine. She was more than fine. This knowledge helped and also, in a small and untranslatable way, didn't. He sat with the bourbon and the quiet and let the evening take its shape. At 6:47, someone knocked on his door. He stood in the doorway for a moment before opening it. He was not expecting anyone. The delivery services did not knock like that. They knocked once and retreated. This knock had a different quality, deliberate, slightly uncertain, as though the person on the other side had paused before committing to it. He opened the door. Rachel Miller stood on the front step with a casserole dish covered in aluminum foil, a light snow accumulating on her coat, and the expression of someone who had rehearsed something and was now not sure any of it applied. He had known Rachel for the duration of his marriage and a year before it. She was Laura's younger sister by 3 years, 35 now, a third-grade teacher at an elementary school across town, someone he had seen at holidays and birthday parties and the occasional Sunday dinner without ever having a real conversation with her. She was quiet in the way that people who pay close attention are quiet. She had dark hair cut, practically short, and an even expression that teachers seemed to develop as occupational armor. They had not spoken since the divorce proceedings, which was not a deliberate severance, more an understanding that the geometry of their connection had changed, and neither knew quite how to redraw it. "I made a sweet potato casserole," she said. "I made too much, I thought." She stopped, recalibrated. "I knew you might be here alone." He looked at her. Then, at the casserole dish. The snow was coming down steadily now. "I was planning on being alone," he said. "I know." She didn't move. Neither did he. "I almost didn't knock." The light from the entryway reached the front step and caught the snow still on her coat. The ceramic penguin on the kitchen doorknob swung once, caught by the draft from the open door. "Come in," he said. "You'll freeze." She came in. She unwound her scarf and draped it over the hook by the door, the same hook where Emma hung her backpack, which Daniel noted with a sensation he could not quite name. Rachel stood in the entryway and looked at the house with the particular attentiveness of someone reading a page they had only heard described. The living room was warm. The tree was lit, a modest assemblage of Emma's ornaments catching the light in a way that was more about abundance than elegance. The felt star tilted left. The ceramic penguin rocked once more in the draft before settling. "She made all of those," Daniel said, meaning the ornaments. "I know." Rachel's voice was quiet. "Laura has pictures." He took the casserole dish to the kitchen, and she followed. The chicken was still in the oven, not quite ready. He set the casserole on the counter and stood for a moment looking at it, a generous, practical gesture, in an orange ceramic dish with a chipped corner. "Do you want to eat?" he asked. "If you're eating," he was. He got 2 plates from the cabinet, and then, after a moment of consideration, put one back. They ate at the kitchen counter from the casserole dish directly, the way you eat when you are not performing a meal for anyone, and the chicken alongside it, and there was something in the informality of it that reduced the awkwardness from a wall to a threshold. The kitchen had 2 bar stools at the counter. She took the one nearest the window. He stood at first, then sat at the other. Between them was a distance of approximately 2 feet, and an unspoken agreement about what this evening was and was not. The snow outside the kitchen window was thick now, steady, erasing the definition of the yard by degrees. "This is good," he said, meaning the casserole. "It's my aunt's recipe. She always doubles it by accident and then is surprised by how much there is." A brief pause. "I do the same thing. I should know better by now." He almost smiled. He didn't, quite, but it was closer than it had been in a while. They ate in near silence for several minutes, and it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind that comes between people who are both comfortable with their own thoughts and temporarily willing to share space without demanding more from it. Daniel had not had that with anyone in a long time. He noticed it the way you notice a temperature change. Not dramatically, but clearly. Rachel asked about Emma first. He had expected that. "She lost 2 teeth this week," he said. "She's developed a theory about the tooth fairy that involves commodity markets." Rachel set down her fork. At 7, she read a book. She asks follow-up questions. Laura was like that. Something shifted in Rachel's expression, not grief, exactly, but the particular tenderness of an old memory surfaces unexpectedly. "She used to interrogate our mother about the mechanics of Santa's supply chain. Our mother would eventually say she needed to lie down." Daniel laughed. "A real one, brief and genuine. the kind that surprises you with its own existence. Rachel watched him and didn't say anything. He refilled his glass and offered her one. She nodded. He poured 2 careful measures of bourbon and handed her one, and she held it with both hands around the glass, in the way you hold something warm when you're cold. "How is she?" he asked. He meant Laura. It was strange, asking her sister like reading the temperature of a room by touching the wall, but there was no adequate way to ask directly, and they both understood what he was actually asking, which was, "Is there residual damage? Is she all right? Is the thing I did to her by not being enough still a wound, or has it closed?" "She's well," Rachel said. "She's seeing someone. A cardiologist named Philip. He's steady. A beat. She seems happy. Genuinely." He absorbed this. "Good," he said, and meant it. He had processed his feelings about the end of the marriage in the way that men of a certain type process difficult things. Slowly, privately, and with moderate reliance on physical labor. He had rebuilt the back fence that summer and repainted the garage and rewired 2 outlets that had been problematic for years. By the time the fence was done, he was mostly through the worst of it. The anger had passed first. The grief had taken longer. What remained was something more like the memory of pain, tender if you pressed on it, but no longer acute. "I don't think about it much anymore," he said. "It was only half a lie. I think about Emma. I think about work. I think about whether the gutters need cleaning again before spring." He paused. "The gutters always need cleaning before spring." "That's something," Rachel said. "It's something," he agreed. The bourbon was good. The snow was still falling. Somewhere down the block, someone had a radio on, and the faint sound of an old carol reached them through the window, not distinct enough to name, just the suggestion of music, the way a scent suggests a place rather than defining it. She told him about her work without being asked, which surprised him. He had assumed unfairly. He recognized that she had come because of some obligation, some family-adjacent guilt about the divorced brother-in-law alone on a Saturday in December. But she spoke about her classroom with the low energy of genuine investment, the way people talk about things that actually matter to them. She had 22 third graders. The range was extraordinary, she said, not in the textbook sense of learning differences and accommodations, but in the sense of what each child was carrying that the school day would not pause to account for. "There's a boy named Tyler," she said. "His father is stationed overseas. He knows where every country is on the map because he checks it every day to see where his dad might be. He's 8. She turned the glass in her hands. "He doesn't talk about it. He just knows the map." Daniel said nothing. He was listening in the way he listened when something was worth hearing. "There's a girl named June whose grandmother has Parkinson's. June is the one who gets herself ready every morning. She does her own hair. 8 years old. It's almost always a little uneven, the part. But she works so hard on it." Rachel paused. "I keep a pack of hair elastics in my desk for her in case she needs them. And then there's a boy, Henry, who cries every Monday morning. Every week, without fail, he stops by noon. No one can quite figure it out. I've talked to his parents and they don't know either. Mondays are hard for Henry." She looked at the window. "I started putting something in the bottom of his cubby on Monday mornings. A small cookie wrapped in wax paper. I don't make a thing of it. He never mentions it either, but he doesn't cry until as late in the morning as he used to." Daniel stared at her. "You figured that out yourself. It took 2 months. I tried a lot of things first, but you kept trying." She considered this as though it hadn't occurred to her as something notable. "They're 8, she said finally. "They can't advocate for themselves yet. Someone has to pay attention." He thought about Emma's cactus, about how he watered it on Emma's off weeks without being reminded, because Emma had asked him to, and because the cactus did not know it was supposed to be self-sufficient, and because he was the adult in the house and that was the job. "You're good at this," he said. "I don't know," she said. "I just don't want to be the person who looked away." The kitchen was warm. The casserole dish was half empty. Outside, the snow had slowed to something soft and continuous. He told her about the phone call. He hadn't planned to. It had happened 3 weeks ago on a Tuesday, Emma had called at 8:15 as usual, and he had answered, expecting the daily report. But instead there was the sound of her crying, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, in the particular way children cry when they don't want to be found crying and are doing it anyway. "What happened?" he had asked. "Nothing," she said, which meant something. "I just miss you." He had sat very still on the kitchen floor. He'd been at the counter, and he had slid down to sitting, the phone against his ear, and said, "I know, Bug. I miss you too. Every day." She had cried a little more and then said she was embarrassed, and he had said there was nothing to be embarrassed about, ever. Not with him. He had told her a story then. Improvised, because the improvised ones were the ones that worked best for her. He'd told her about a girl who lived in a castle with 2 towers. Not 2 separate castles, 1 castle, 2 towers, both equally hers. She had a room in each tower, and each room was different, and she loved different things about each one, and the castle wasn't divided. It was doubled. "The girl doesn't have to choose?" Emma had asked. "She never has to choose," he had said. "The castle is built that way on purpose." Emma had been quiet for a moment. "That's a good castle," she had said. "It's the best one." He had agreed. She had gone to sleep shortly after. He had stayed on the kitchen floor for a while after the call ended, in the dark, not moving. He told Rachel this without embellishment. He described the floor and the dark and the phone face up beside him, and the way the refrigerator hum was the only sound. Rachel didn't immediately respond. She held her glass and looked at the middle distance in the way people look when they are taking something in rather than formulating a reply. "The 2-tower story?" she said, finally. "It's not very architecturally sound," he said. From a structural standpoint, she almost laughed. Her mouth moved in that direction and then settled into something quieter, and she looked at him directly, for the first time that evening, not glancing, but looking. "She's lucky," Rachel said. "She's the only thing I got entirely right," Daniel said. And then, because the bourbon had given the truth a shorter path to the surface, "Everything else I'm still working out." Rachel nodded once. Slowly. Like that was the correct answer. It was close to 10 o'clock when she began gathering herself to leave. Not abruptly, she glanced at her watch and said she should get ahead of the snow before it got worse on the roads. And Daniel could not argue with this because she was right. He walked her to the door. She put on her coat and wound the scarf back around her neck, a practiced, efficient motion, the motion of someone who dressed for weather as a daily fact and picked up her empty casserole dish from the counter where he had rinsed it. She tucked it under one arm. They stood at the door. The porch light was on, throwing a cone of yellow across the front steps and the snow that had accumulated there. The yard was white and smooth. The string lights he had hung earlier, illuminating its edges in a thin, cold line. He thought about handshakes and hugs and how neither felt right and how possibly nothing did when you were standing at the edge of a conversation that had been more than either of you intended. "I wasn't sure you'd open the door," she said. "I wasn't sure I wanted to." A pause. The snow fell. Down the block, the radio had gone quiet. "Do you?" she asked. In retrospect, he turned and looked at the living room. The lit tree. Emma's ornaments. The star tilted to the left because Emma had placed it that way, and he had never straightened it because he had learned to find his daughter's crooked things beautiful. The penguin on the doorknob. Still now. He thought about the kitchen floor 3 weeks ago in the dark. He thought about the gutters. He thought about the 1.5 years he had spent declining Marcus's invitations, not because he didn't like Marcus, but because presence requires something of you, and he had not had much left to offer. Something had shifted tonight. Not dramatically. Not in the way that changes announce themselves in stories, no revelation. No clarity like a window thrown open. More like the slight alteration in a building's load distribution when one wall is reinforced. Structural, incremental, real. "Yes," he said. "I think I did." She nodded. She seemed to consider whether to say something further and then decided against it in favor of the simplest possible thing. "Merry Christmas, Daniel." "Merry Christmas, Rachel." She walked down the front steps with the casserole dish under her arm, and he watched her car reverse out of the driveway carefully, tail lights red against the snow. He stood in the doorway until she had turned the corner, and then, a moment after, he closed the door. The house was warm and quiet in the way it always was on his off weeks, but not in the same way as it had been 3 hours ago. The same temperature, the same furniture, the same hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. And yet, something had settled differently, as though the interior air had rearranged itself slightly around the presence that had been and gone. He turned off the porch light. He stood in the living room for a while. The tree was still lit. Emma's ornaments caught the light from their positions on the lower branches. A construction paper wreath she had made in kindergarten, laminated and hung with a loop of red ribbon. A wooden reindeer from a craft kit she had assembled entirely wrong and been proud of regardless. A small frame with a photo inside of the two of them on a hiking trail. The summer after the divorce, Emma's chin raised in the particular way she held it when she was trying to look tall. He was squinting against the sun. They were both laughing at something. He didn't remember what they had been laughing about. He remembered the laughing. He took the bourbon glass to the kitchen and set it in the sink. The casserole dish was gone. The counter was clean. He stood at the kitchen window and watched the snow fall on the backyard steady, patient, covering everything in the same white layer without preference or narrative. He thought about what Rachel had said about Henry and the Monday mornings and the cookie in the cubby. About the 2 months she had spent trying things that didn't work before finding the thing that did. About the girl named June who parted her own hair with an 8-year-old's precision and the elastics Rachel kept in her desk. He thought about the conversation in the way you think about a room you have been inside only once, not cataloging it, just holding the impression of it. The warmth, the kitchen counter, the way she had held the glass. He did not think about what it meant. He was not ready to think about what it meant, and he was old enough to know the difference between thoughts that were ready to be had and thoughts that were still becoming. What he thought instead was this. He had been closed for a long time, not deliberately, not as strategy, more the way a building closes in winter. The load redistributes, the joints contract, the whole structure draws inward for preservation. Tonight, for a few hours, someone had been inside. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to the living room and sat in the chair by the window, not the sofa, the chair, because the chair faced the tree and he looked at Emma's ornaments in the low light. The felt star, the crooked reindeer, the photo of them on the trail. Outside, the snow continued. Finch Street was entirely white now, the street lamp at the corner making a circle of orange light on the untouched surface of the road. No cars, no footprints yet. The string lights on the porch railing made their thin, cold line. He would call Emma in the morning. She would tell him about whatever she had built at her grandmother's house, and he would listen with his whole attention, and she would ask him if the cactus was okay, and he would say it was fine, and she would say good because she had given it a name. He hadn't asked what name. He needed to ask. He made a mental note. Then he sat in the quiet for a while longer and did not fill it. The tree light was warm. The house was warm. Somewhere outside, a plow was moving slowly down a distant street, its sound low and deliberate and patient. He was not happy the way he had been happy before. That particular version of happiness seemed to belong to another set of years. A version of himself who had not yet learned what certain costs felt like. But he was something. Sitting here in the chair with the bourbon finished and the kitchen dark and Emma's star tilting left the way it always did, he was something. Not fixed, not arrived, but open. Maybe. In the way that a door, when someone knocks, sometimes opens not because you were ready but because you went ahead and answered anyway. The snow fell. The lights held. Daniel Carter sat in the chair by the window and let the night finish itself around him, and for the first time in longer than he could measure, he did not need it to be anything other than what it was.